Welcome to The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest, a powerful book that gently but honestly reveals one life-changing truth. The greatest obstacles we face are often created within us. This book is not about blaming yourself or reliving past mistakes. It is about understanding why you get stuck, why you repeat the same patterns, and why growth can feel uncomfortable even when you deeply desire change. Brianna Wiest explains that self-sabotage is not a flaw, it is a survival response. It is the mind's way of protecting you from perceived danger, even when that protection is no longer serving you. Throughout this book, you'll discover how emotional triggers, subconscious beliefs, and unresolved experiences quietly shape your decisions. You'll learn why letting go feels harder than holding on, why familiarity often feels safer than happiness, and how real transformation begins not with force, but with awareness and compassion. The Mountain Is You invites you to climb inward, to face yourself with honesty, patience, and courage. It teaches that self-mastery is not about becoming perfect, but about becoming conscious. When you understand your patterns, you gain the power to change them. When you stop fighting yourself, growth becomes possible. This book is for anyone who feels stuck, overwhelmed, or disconnected from their potential. It is a reminder that you are not broken. You are becoming. If this message resonates with you, you're in the right place. Join the Wiser Reads community by subscribing to the channel. Together, we explore books that heal, awaken, and help us grow into our highest selves. Your journey starts here. The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest is a transformative exploration of self-sabotage and the hidden inner patterns that prevent people from becoming who they truly want to be. The book presents a powerful idea. The greatest challenges we face are not external obstacles, but internal ones, shaped by fear, conditioning, and unconscious beliefs. Wiest explains that self-sabotage is not a sign of weakness or lack of discipline. Instead, it is a learned survival response developed to protect us from emotional pain, uncertainty, or failure. These behaviors often stem from unresolved experiences, emotional wounds, and deeply ingrained habits that once served a purpose, but now limit growth. Through emotional insight and practical reflection, the book guides readers to recognize their triggers as valuable signals rather than enemies. By understanding what activates emotional reactions, individuals can uncover unmet needs, suppressed feelings, and subconscious fears that influence their decisions. Awareness becomes the foundation for change. The Mountain Is You emphasizes that true transformation requires radical self-honesty, emotional responsibility, and compassion toward oneself. Rather than forcing change through willpower alone, Wiest encourages gentle consistency, self-trust, and the rebuilding of one's inner relationship. Growth happens when we stop resisting discomfort and begin to work with it. The book ultimately reframes self-mastery as a daily practice rather than a final destination. By choosing awareness over avoidance and intention over impulse, readers learn to release old patterns and create a life aligned with their values. The mountain is not something to conquer, it is something to understand and integrate. And in doing so, we become our own greatest ally rather than our greatest obstacle. How self-sabotage becomes a learned behavior explores the idea that self-sabotaging actions are not accidental or rooted in personal failure, but are behaviors learned through experience and emotional conditioning. Brianna Wiest explains that the human mind is designed to prioritize safety over happiness, often choosing familiar discomfort instead of unfamiliar growth. From early life experiences, individuals develop coping mechanisms to manage stress, rejection, or emotional pain. When certain behaviors once helped reduce discomfort or gain approval, the brain records them as protective, even if they later become harmful. Over time, these responses turn into automatic patterns that operate beneath conscious awareness, guiding decisions, reactions, and habits. The chapter highlights how fear of change, fear of loss, and fear of the unknown reinforce self-sabotage. Success, healing, or emotional vulnerability can feel threatening because they disrupt familiar identities and routines. As a result, people may procrastinate, withdraw, overthink, or repeat unhealthy relationships, not because they want to fail, but because their nervous system associates familiarity with safety. Wiest emphasizes that awareness is the first step toward change. By observing repeated behaviors without judgment, individuals can trace them back to the original emotional need they were meant to protect. Self-sabotage often signals unmet needs, unresolved emotions, or limiting beliefs that require compassion rather than criticism. The chapter concludes by reframing self-sabotage as an opportunity for growth. Once these behaviors are understood as learned, not inherent, they can be unlearned. Through conscious choice, emotional responsibility, and gentle consistency, individuals can replace outdated survival strategies with healthier ones. Transformation begins when we stop fighting ourselves and start understanding why we behave the way we do.
Your triggers are guides, not enemies. Reframes emotional triggers as valuable sources of self-awareness rather than problems to eliminate. Brianna Wiest explains that triggers arise when present experiences activate unresolved emotions, beliefs, or memories from the past. They're not signs of weakness or emotional instability, but indicators of deeper inner work that needs attention. The chapter emphasizes that what provokes strong emotional reactions is often tied to unmet needs, suppressed feelings, or unhealed experiences. When someone feels disproportionately upset, defensive, or overwhelmed, it is rarely about the situation itself. Instead, the reaction points to an internal wound or belief seeking acknowledgement. Triggers reveal where growth is required. Wiest encourages readers to observe their triggers without judgment or avoidance. By pausing instead of reacting, individuals can ask meaningful questions. Why does this affect me so deeply? What belief is being challenged? What am I afraid of losing or feeling again? Through this process, triggers become tools for emotional intelligence rather than sources of shame. The chapter also explains that avoiding triggers only strengthen them. Suppression delays healing, while conscious engagement allows emotional patterns to dissolve naturally. By taking responsibility for emotional responses, individuals regain control over their inner world instead of projecting blame onto others or circumstances. Ultimately, your triggers are guides, not enemies, teaches that emotional discomfort is not a threat, but an invitation. Each trigger carries a message about what needs healing, boundaries, or self-compassion. When triggers are approached with curiosity and honesty, they lead to greater emotional intelligence, resilience, and self-mastery. Instead of resisting emotional pain, the chapter encourages using it as a compass pointing toward personal growth and deeper self-understanding.
Emotional intelligence and radical self-honesty focuses on the essential role of awareness and truth in personal transformation. Brianna Wiest explains that emotional intelligence is not about controlling or suppressing feelings, but about understanding them clearly and responding with intention rather than impulse. It begins with recognizing emotions as signals that carry information about our needs, values, and internal state. The chapter emphasizes radical self-honesty as a foundation for growth. This means being willing to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about oneself without denial or self-judgment. Many people remain stuck not because they lack ability, but because they avoid confronting the real reasons behind their behaviors: fear, insecurity, attachment, or unmet emotional needs. Self-honesty allows these hidden motivations to come into awareness. Wiest highlights how emotional avoidance often appears in subtle forms, such as rationalizing unhealthy habits, blaming external circumstances, or minimizing one's own desires. Emotional intelligence requires taking responsibility for feelings instead of projecting them onto others. By naming emotions accurately and understanding their origins, individuals gain clarity and emotional stability. The chapter also explains that self-honesty does not mean self-criticism. On the contrary, it demands compassion and patience. When emotions are met with understanding rather than resistance, they naturally lose their intensity. This creates space for conscious choice rather than automatic reaction. Ultimately, emotional intelligence and radical self-honesty teaches that transformation happens when awareness replaces avoidance. By cultivating emotional literacy and telling ourselves the truth, especially when it is uncomfortable, we reclaim personal power. Growth becomes sustainable not through force, but through clarity, responsibility, and a deeper, more respectful relationship with oneself. Why You Cling to What Hurts explores the paradox of why people remain attached to situations, habits, and relationships that cause pain, even when healthier alternatives are available. Brianna Wiest explains that the human mind often prefers familiar suffering over unfamiliar peace. What is known feels safer than what is uncertain, even if it is harmful. The chapter reveals that emotional attachment to pain is rarely about desire, but about identity and conditioning. Past experiences shape beliefs about what feels normal, deserved, or expected. When someone has learned to associate love with instability, effort with exhaustion, or worth with struggle, they may unconsciously seek out experiences that reinforce those patterns. Pain becomes predictable, and predictability feels secure. Wiest also explains how clinging to hurt can serve as a form of emotional protection. Letting go requires grieving old identities, releasing control, and facing the fear of the unknown. In many cases, people remain attached to pain because it validates familiar stories about themselves, such as feeling unworthy, needed, or strong through suffering. The chapter emphasizes that healing does not begin with forceful detachment, but with understanding. By becoming aware of why something feels hard to release, individuals can uncover the emotional needs being met beneath the pain. Compassion, not resistance, allows these attachments to loosen. Ultimately, Why You Cling to What Hurts teaches that growth requires the courage to choose discomfort that leads to healing, rather than comfort that sustains pain. When individuals stop romanticizing struggle and begin honoring peace, they make room for healthier patterns, deeper self-worth, and a life no longer shaped by unconscious attachment to suffering. Releasing the past without reliving it addresses one of the most common obstacles to healing, the belief that we must repeatedly revisit painful memories in order to move on. Brianna Wiest explains that while awareness of the past is necessary, re-experiencing emotional pain over and over can keep individuals trapped rather than free. The chapter emphasizes that healing is not about erasing memories or denying what happened, but about changing one's relationship with those experiences. The past only holds power when it continues to define identity, expectations, and emotional reactions in the present. True release occurs when lessons are integrated without reopening old wounds. Wiest highlights how many people unconsciously relive the past through rumination, self-blame, or repeating similar patterns. This repetition is often an attempt to gain control, understanding, or closure. However, growth comes not from reliving pain, but from creating safety and stability in the present moment. The chapter encourages readers to shift focus from why something happened to how it shaped them and what it taught them. By grounding themselves in the present, individuals can acknowledge past experiences with compassion rather than emotional attachment. Boundaries, self-trust, and emotional regulation become essential tools for healing. Ultimately, releasing the past without reliving it teaches that freedom is found in acceptance, not repetition. The past does not need to be re-entered to be released. When individuals honor their experiences without allowing them to control their present choices, they reclaim their emotional energy and move forward with clarity, resilience, and a renewed sense of inner peace. Reprogramming the subconscious mind explores how deeply ingrained beliefs and automatic behaviors shape daily life without conscious awareness. Brianna Wiest explains that the subconscious mind is responsible for habits, emotional reactions, and self-perception, operating on patterns formed through repetition, emotional intensity, and early experiences. These patterns continue to guide behavior long after they are no longer useful. The chapter emphasizes that change cannot rely on willpower alone. Because most self-sabotaging behaviors are subconscious, lasting transformation requires addressing the beliefs beneath the behavior, not just the behavior itself. When conscious desires conflict with subconscious programming, the subconscious usually wins, pulling individuals back into familiar patterns. Wiest highlights awareness as the first step in reprogramming. By noticing repeated emotional reactions, thought loops, and habitual choices, individuals can identify the underlying beliefs driving them. Once brought into consciousness, these beliefs lose their automatic power and become open to change. The chapter explains that the subconscious is reshaped through consistency, emotional safety, and new evidence. Small, intentional actions practiced daily send signals to the nervous system that change is safe. Over time, the brain forms new neural pathways, replacing outdated survival responses with healthier ones. Rather than forcing positive thinking, Wiest encourages aligning thoughts, emotions, and actions. Self-trust is built through follow-through, boundaries, and honoring one's needs. Each aligned choice reinforces a new internal identity. Ultimately, reprogramming the subconscious mind teaches that transformation is not sudden or dramatic, but gradual and compassionate. By repeatedly choosing behaviors that support growth, individuals retrain the mind to work with them rather than against them. Self-mastery emerges when the subconscious becomes an ally instead of an obstacle. Choosing growth over comfort explores the difficult but necessary decision to step beyond familiar patterns in order to create meaningful change. Brianna Wiest explains that comfort is often misunderstood as peace, when in reality it can be a subtle form of stagnation. Growth, by contrast, requires uncertainty, effort, and the willingness to feel uncomfortable in the short term for long-term fulfillment. The chapter highlights how the mind is wired to avoid discomfort, even when that discomfort leads to improvement. Familiar routines, identities, and relationships can feel safe simply because they are known. As a result, people often delay change, settle for less, or remain stuck, not because they lack potential, but because comfort feels less threatening than transformation. Wiest emphasizes that growth does not come from dramatic leaps, but from consistent, intentional choices that align with one's values. Choosing growth means acting in accordance with the person you want to become, even when emotions resist. It requires discipline rooted in self-respect, not punishment. The chapter also addresses the fear of failure and loss that often accompanies change. Letting go of comfort may mean letting go of old identities, expectations, or external validation. However, Wiest reframes discomfort as a sign of expansion rather than danger. When approached consciously, discomfort becomes evidence that growth is taking place. Ultimately, choosing growth over comfort teaches that lasting fulfillment comes from integrity, not ease. Each time individuals choose long-term well-being over short-term relief, they strengthen self-trust and inner resilience. Growth becomes a lifestyle, not a struggle, one built through courage, patience, and the quiet commitment to becoming more than what feels safe. Self-mastery is a daily practice. Self-mastery as a daily practice emphasizes that true personal transformation is not achieved through a single breakthrough, but through consistent, intentional choices made every day. Brianna Wiest explains that self-mastery is not about perfection or rigid control, but about developing awareness, responsibility, and self-trust over time. The chapter highlights that growth happens in ordinary moments, how one responds to emotions, manages impulses, honors boundaries, and follows through on commitments. Small decisions, repeated daily, shape identity far more than occasional bursts of motivation. What we practice consistently becomes who we are. Wiest challenges the belief that self-mastery means suppressing emotions or eliminating struggle. Instead, it involves learning how to regulate emotions, pause before reacting, and choose responses aligned with long-term values rather than short-term comfort. Emotional discipline is framed as an act of self-respect, not self-denial. The chapter also emphasizes the importance of self-trust. Each time individuals keep promises to themselves, no matter how small, they reinforce a sense of inner reliability. This trust becomes the foundation for confidence and resilience. Conversely, repeated self-betrayal weakens motivation and reinforces self-doubt. Wiest encourages readers to focus on progress, not intensity. Sustainable change comes from realistic routines, compassionate self-correction, and patience. Self-mastery is built through repetition, forgiveness, and recommitment, especially after setbacks. Ultimately, self-mastery is a daily practice, teaches that transformation is a process, not a destination. Mastery is not something achieved once, but something lived through mindful choices each day. By choosing awareness, responsibility, and consistency, individuals gradually become aligned with their values and capable of creating lasting, meaningful change.
Becoming the person who moves forward focuses on the final and most transformative shift, releasing attachment to the past self and stepping fully into a new identity. Brianna Wiest explains that lasting change does not come from fixing who you were, but from becoming someone who no longer needs old patterns, defenses, or excuses. The chapter emphasizes that moving forward is not about forgetting the past, but about no longer allowing it to define present choices. Growth requires letting go of identities formed through pain, survival, or limitation. Many people remain stuck not because they cannot change, but because they are emotionally attached to who they have been. Wiest highlights that becoming a forward-moving person means acting in alignment with the future you desire, even before motivation or confidence fully arrives. Identity is shaped by behavior. Each decision made in favor of healing, responsibility, and self-respect reinforces a new sense of self. The chapter also addresses fear of failure, fear of uncertainty, and fear of success. Moving forward requires trusting yourself more than your doubts. Rather than waiting to feel ready, individuals are encouraged to build readiness through action. Ultimately, becoming the person who moves forward teaches that transformation is not about dramatic change, but about consistency and courage. When individuals stop negotiating with old limitations and commit to growth, forward movement becomes natural. The past loses its grip, clarity replaces confusion, and life begins to reflect the person you have chosen to become. Listening to The Mountain Is You is not just an experience of gaining knowledge. It is an invitation to self-awareness and inner change. Throughout this book, Brianna Wiest gently reminds us that the obstacles we struggle against are often the parts of ourselves that learn to survive before they learn to grow. What we call self-sabotage is not failure, but a signal asking to be understood, not punished. This book teaches us that healing does not come from forcing ourselves to be different, but from becoming honest about who we are and why we act the way we do. It shows us how emotional triggers can become guides, how comfort can quietly keep us stuck, and how growth requires courage, patience, and consistency. Step by step, it reframes transformation as a daily practice rooted in self-respect rather than self-criticism. By the end of this journey, one truth becomes clear. The mountain was never meant to block your path. It was meant to be climbed within. When you learn to work with your mind instead of against it, when you choose awareness over avoidance and responsibility over resistance, you become someone who moves forward naturally. This book leaves us with a powerful message. You are not broken, behind, or incapable. You are in the process of becoming, and that process deserves compassion. If this audiobook resonated with you, know that you're not alone on this path. Join the Wiser Reads family by subscribing to the channel, where we explore books that heal, awaken, and strengthen the inner self. Your growth matters, your journey matters, and we would be honored to walk it with you, right here on Wiser Reads.